We appreciate you continuing to support us with your prayers, and we hope someday we will all be together again. Also, thanks to all of you who came here today to experience this worship together in the flesh, so to speak. And we're happy to have you with us and appreciate your support as well. Let's begin with a prayer preparation. Lord, we're so thankful today that we are able to have your word and to be inspired by it, to be taught by it, to be guided by it. Help us then today as we reflect upon this last great bliss of Christian living, the bliss of being a peacemaker. Help us to understand more fully what that means. Help us to understand how we can be the peacemaker we were meant to be. For we pray in Christ's name. Amen. Amen. Well, this is the last of the 7 messages that I have brought to you on the bliss of Christian living. It is meant to be a blissful life, a life filled with amazing, wonderful joy and peace and love. And I think the portrait is almost complete now. I've tried to paint that picture of what does a blissful Christian look like. They're a humble person. They are a person who is comforted. They are a person who is loving and merciful and gentle. They are a person who is God-connected, and they are a person who is pure in their motives. And then today, most of all, they are a person who is rightly called a peacemaker. And that's what we'll focus upon today. Is what does it mean to be a peacemaker? How can we be a peacemaker? And what is the bliss of being a peacemaker? I'm sure all of you have had this kind of an experience. Especially the older we get, we have this kind of experience. Where we go into the kitchen to get something, and then all of a sudden we look around and we say to ourselves, why am I here? Just kind of totally forget why we're here. Well, you know, of all these Beatitudes we've looked at, this last one is the only one that identifies a person in the sense of a noun. This is why we are here. This last of the 7 great Beatitudes. This is why we are on the face of this earth. We are here to be the peacemakers. That's why we were born. That's why we live here. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. We are supposed to be the peacemakers. And all of those characteristics and all of those blisses that we have thought about so far, all of them move us in the direction of the last one. And the last one is to be the peacemaker. So, what is a peacemaker? It's a good question if we're going to think upon this. We oftentimes think only in terms of generalities. But the Scriptures would rather that we think in terms of specifics. Peacemaker. We oftentimes just kind of forget that last part. Maker. We think about peace. Oh, peace, peace is great. We love peace. Everybody likes peace. But the key is to be a peacemaker. Maker. What's a maker? What is a maker? I was amazed when I looked on the internet just to see what it said. There's an entire movement in the world called the Maker Movement. I didn't even know about it. A maker is somebody who makes something. Something that's never been made before, perhaps. We used to maybe call them inventors, but that's a maker. And in our language, we are familiar with terms like bread maker. What does a bread maker make? Well, they make bread. Or candle maker. Well, what does a candle maker make? They make candles. Troublemaker. What does a troublemaker make? Trouble. So what does a peacemaker make? Well, of course, pretty obvious. A peacemaker makes peace. But you see, it's an individual thing. It's not some big generality. It's an individual thing. It's like making bread or making candles. It's like making furniture, perhaps. It's making something in your life. It's being a craftsman. It's being someone who works at making peace. Well, that's great. We now know that a peacemaker is somebody who works at making peace, but then that still leaves the question, what is peace? If you're going to make peace, you really need to know what peace is, you see. You've got to understand it. And I'm afraid, first of all, in our current time, we've really kind of forgotten what peace is all about. And worse than that, we've accepted a definition of peace that is not really what peace is about. You ask most people today, what is peace? And they will say to you that it is the absence of conflict. That's kind of how we've defined peace over the years. We've had so much war, we've had so much conflict that we say, well, peace must be the absence of conflict. But no, that's not peace. That's neutrality. Peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is the presence of love. Let me say that one more time. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It's the presence of love. I'm reminded of a couple we had in one of my churches. Harry and Sally. Still remember them to this day. What was so remarkable about Harry and Sally is they fought all the time. Even in church they fought. They were always arguing with each other, and with a high-pitched voice as well, so that everyone could hear them. I remember one time I happened to walk out into the parking lot after the services, and they were having a big argument in front of their car. It seems as though Sally thought Harry did not know how to park the car correctly. Look, she said, you didn't get within both of these lines. And of course he was offended by that, and he says, well, next time you can park the car. And so she says, well, you talk like that, you're going to cook your own Sunday dinner. He says, no, I'm not going to cook my Sunday dinner. I'm going to the barbecue restaurant, and you're going to eat by yourself. This was going on right there as the pastor was watching it all. And I remember turning to a woman, a friend of theirs that was standing nearby watching this as well. And I said, my goodness, these people must really not like each other at all. Their marriage must be a hell, and there must not be any peace there. And this woman looked at me and she said, oh no, Pastor. She said, I've known them since high school. They love each other more than anybody I ever know. They just argue a lot. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It's the presence of love, you see. People can fight all day long, but if they love each other, well, it still comes back to a unified, wonderful, amazing relationship. Because love overcomes conflict, yes. And when conflict is overcome by love, what do we have? We have peace. And so, this is something that we have to understand. If we're going to make peace, we have to understand that what we're really doing is bringing the presence of love into our life, into the lives of others, into the lives of the world. That's what we're doing if we're making peace. We're bringing in love. We're not trying to do away with conflict. Conflict is always going to be part of human nature. Conflict is always going to be present among us. But love is not necessarily always present among us, you see. So it's our responsibility to be the ones that make peace. And the way we make peace is by bringing love into the lives of ourselves and others in the world in which we live. A peacemaker is someone who builds love. A peacemaker is someone who brings love. A peacemaker is somebody who gives love. Because the more love you bring, the more love you give, the more peace there will be. People who feel loved do not necessarily engage in unpeaceful living. It's a key ingredient. And if we don't have love, then all we have is conflict. And if all we have is conflict, we have no peace. It begins with ourselves. We must let the love of God into our hearts. We must feel loved by God first. And then once we have felt that, we must help others to feel that. And we must help and pray that our world will feel that. Because for every person that feels love, that's less persons that will engage in war and conflict and difficulty in the world. Well, so that's what we make when we make peace. Is we make peace out of love. That's what we do. If we are a peacemaker, that's what we do. But then, of course, it just keeps going, these questions. Okay, if that's what we do, how do we do it? How do we bring love into this world? How do we make peace out of love? How do we do that as individuals? What kind of things do we engage in if we are to bring love into the world so that we will actually make some peace? What do we do? How do we do that? Well, I'm reminded of an experience I had many years ago. When I was a young man, I was very interested in cooking. I loved cooking. I even went to the Cordon Bleu School there in Houston to learn about gourmet cooking. And I was very interested in all the different techniques that you use when you cook something. But one of the things that I was really interested in those days was bread. Bread was just becoming artisanal back in the 70s. Before that, all we had was sliced white bread. But all of a sudden, they started making these wonderful artisanal breads, and I wanted to know how to do that. So I studied that a bit. But there was a man, a chef actually, in our city, who was known for making famous artisanal bread. People waited in long lines to buy his bread. And one day, he was putting on a workshop at one of the malls there, showing people some of the tips and some of the shortcuts and some of the things he did when he made bread. And I said, oh, I must go and watch that because I'm interested in what he does when he makes bread. Because when I tried to make it, well, it was okay. But it certainly wasn't something people would wait in line for. So I went there, and I listened to his presentation. And he spoke like this. He said, you know, making bread is a passion for me. And I could tell it was a passion for me. And the reason my bread comes out the way it does is because of the love I put into making this bread. That caught my attention. I said, how can you put love into making bread? How do you do that? And he began to explain how he did it. And I wrote it down. I'm thankful I wrote it down because I've used it so many times in sermons throughout the years. He said the first thing that you must do when you get your flour together and you're beginning to put the water into the flour, you must have compassion, he said. He said, you must feel the thirst of the flour for the water. You must feel the thirst of the flour for the water. And as you gently feed the flour the water, you feel the flour being refreshed, and you can feel when the flour has had enough water. Because you feel the flour. You're empathetic with the flour. You feel its thirst and you're giving to it what it needs. You have this compassion for the flour. If you don't have it, you'll end up putting in too much water, or you won't put in enough water, and nothing good will come of that. It's the exact amount of water, and no recipe can tell you how much that is. You have to feel it. And I thought to myself, that could be used in a sermon, couldn't it? When we're building peace in this world, in ourselves and in others' lives, we need to feel the thirst of others. We need to feel what they feel. We need to feel how thirsty they are for a kind word, or maybe how thirsty they are for a comforting word, or maybe how thirsty they are just to have someone listen to them. There's no telling what their thirst is, but if you don't pay attention to the thirst of others, you either won't give them enough water or you'll drown them in water they didn't want in the first place. So this is one of the keys into how we add love into our lives, is by stopping and reflecting and asking our hearts, what do others need? What are they thirsty for? And then seek to give that to them. Feel what their thirst is and satisfy it. That's one way we give love. And that's a very important way to build peace in the world. So if you're going to be a peacemaker, you learn to have compassion upon others and feel what it is they need. Well, then he went on with his presentation. And this one really amazed me. He said, you must be universal in your acceptance of the flower. Now, of course, I was a pastor, and I thought, well, I believe in universal love, but universally accepting flower? What does that possibly mean? And he says, you know, you got all this flour spread out on your cabinet, and you're making your dough. And he says, most people are prejudiced against the flour that's out here somewhere. And then he said it this way. A cup of flour is a cup of flour, not 99% of a cup of flour. He says the reason most bread doesn't reach the level it needs to reach is because you did not use all the flour that was required. You were prejudiced against some. You kicked some away. And your bread doesn't have exactly enough flour in it that it will be the kind of bread it needs to be. So I thought, well, there's another great idea, isn't it? Universally accept all people, because you never know what role somebody's going to play in this world. You never know what taste somebody is going to add to the equation of life. Oh yeah, there's good people, bad people, ugly people, all kinds of people. But the mix is for all people, you see. Love one another all together, one another. Either we all make it or none of us make it. Yeah, it's like that parable about the 99 sheep, you know. That seems to me to be enough sheep. Who needs 100 sheep? But Jesus says, no, 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 no. We leave the 99 out here in the wilderness, and we keep looking till we find the one missing sheep, because it's 100% of all humanity that we need, not 99%. You need all the flour you have laid out. Use every bit of it. Make sure that when your loaf is done, every crumb of flour is gone, and it's in the loaf now. You see, this is something we can do. We can learn to work on accepting universally all people in all ways. Doesn't mean we agree with them, doesn't mean we like what they do, or doesn't mean that we think they're the greatest and most wonderful person in the world, but they're a person, and that means they belong in the loaf. And so therefore, our attitude toward all persons are, you're welcome here. You're welcome in our loaf, because we want our loaf to be what God intended it to be from the very beginning. One unified, complete community of humanity. That's what we want. So our attitude changes, and we don't find ourselves being prejudiced against the marginalized flower that's on the outside of the common experience of our human race. We say to ourselves, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to include all of it in my bread that I'm making. That's how we add love to life. There's plenty of prejudice already in the world. There's plenty of judgment in the world already. There's plenty of condemnation in the world already. But universal acceptance is what we need. And guess who has been called to add that to life? Us. That's our job. If we're going to make peace, then we've got to add that ingredient into the lives that we live. Well, he had one final point that he made in his presentation on making good bread. He says, you've got to be an encourager. And I thought, okay, so how are we going to encourage bread? He said, you know, when you're making bread, you knead it with your hands. And he said, some people, when they knead their bread, it's like they get rid of their anger. They put all their anger into that bread. And it tastes kind of bitter. And it doesn't taste very soft. But if you grab your bread and you knead it as if you are encouraging it, come on, loaf, you can be the best bread there ever was. Come on, loaf, you can do it. It's a transference of your encouragement into your bread. And he said people can taste that. They can taste the difference between those who encouraged their bread to be the best that it can be and those who didn't. Well, here again, it can be something we can take advantage of in our Christian calling to be peacemakers. There's a lot of people who are naysayers. There are a lot of negative people in the world. There are a lot of people who will tell you why you did something wrong and exactly why you're not ever going to be anything. There's a lot of people that will do that in this world. A lot of people like to be judgmental of others. They love to tell others what they did wrong or how they should be doing this instead. There's a lot of people who like to add arguments to human living. But the peacemaker says, no, I've come here to encourage. That's why I'm here. I'm here to encourage every person I can find to be the person God meant them to be. That's my job. I'm a peacemaker. And I'm going to encourage my dough, which is your life and the people in your life. I'm going to encourage everyone I know to be the best that they can be, that God has made them to be. I will be the encourager. I never will forget, in Houston when I was a pastor there, a church opened up. And you know, usually we're named First Methodist Church, First Baptist Church, whatever. But this group chose to call themselves the Encouragers. I'd never thought of that before. What a great name for a church. The Encouragers. That's who we are. We're the ones who encourage people to be the best that God has made them to be. And in that encouragement, they feel love. You see, all of these things, compassion, universal acceptance, encouragement, all of these things are basically love. They're just different forms of love. And that's how we make peace. We make peace by adding our compassion into the world. We make peace by adding our universal acceptance into the world. We make peace by adding our encouragement into the world. This is how we add love to the world. This is how we make peace. It's by adding these things in. And then when we add them in, an amazing thing happens. People feel more at peace with themselves. They feel more at peace with each other. And the world is much more beautiful than it was the day before, because we have decided to make some peace today. Some people say, I'm going to make some bread today. Some people say, oh, I'll make a candle today. Some people say, I'm going to make music today. Christians say, I'm going to make some peace today. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to add a little compassion. I'm You want to add a little universal acceptance. You want to put in there a little encouragement. And when I finish the day, I can sit down and say to myself, well, today I made some peace, and therefore I am a peacemaker. You see, that's what I think the Scriptures is encouraging us to do. But now that we know what a peacemaker is, and now that we know what a peacemaker does, we still have this question of what's the bliss of a peacemaker. In other words, each one of these Beatitudes that we have looked at is a blessed, a blessed, a blessed. There's a bliss there. What's the bliss of being a peacemaker? What's the reward of being a peacemaker? It's hard to describe it, I think. But if I had to think about one word that would describe the reward of a peacemaker, it's the word contentment. This is what we receive when we are peacemakers. We are content. There's so many ways I could illustrate that, so many different ideas, but one came to me about an opera singer. I learned to love opera early in my life. I became a musician and began to discover the classics and discover opera, and I began to love to go to operas and listen to the singers, and I was always very impressed by the soprano parts especially. And I went to hear several of the outstanding sopranos of the time. Maria Callas, I got to hear her. Beverly Sills, I got to hear her. Renee Fleming, I got to hear her. And these women were unbelievable in their ability to sing opera. But one time, when Rebecca and I were on a trip, and we were in Austria, and we had gone to an opera in which Renee Fleming was singing that night. It was a wonderful experience. But out in the lobby after the opera was over, they were selling CDs of famous opera singers, Pavarotti and Beverly Sills and all these different people. And we were looking at the CDs, and all of a sudden we discovered one by an opera singer named Sumi Jo, an opera singer from South Korea. And of course, Rebecca was really excited to see her CD. And she told me, she said, oh, this woman is amazing. I'd never heard Sumi Jo in my life before. So we bought the CD, and later on we had an opportunity to play it. And I was blown away. Like I said, I'd heard many good soprano singers, but Sumi Jo just had this natural ability, such warmth she had. And the range, unbelievable, way up there to way down there, and not a difference between any note anywhere. And agility of voice. She sang the Italian operas that have these bouncy, up and down, fast notes. And unbelievable, she could sing those with such precision. You just thought, oh, no human being should be able to sing like this. So anyway, she's been a fan of mine. I've been a fan of hers for many years. But I saw an interview of her on TV it was several years ago now, in which the interviewer was asking her about her life and her career as an opera singer and what all she did to prepare for being an opera singer. And then they asked her the question, what drives you to be the opera singer that you are? What is the source of your joy? And the answer she gave, I think, is one of the greatest answers I've ever heard to define what is joy and what is contentment. Because for her, that's what singing was. It was joy and contentment. And she said it this way: when I'm singing, I know that I am doing exactly what I was meant to do. Exactly where I was meant to do it. And exactly in the way I was meant to do it. That's contentment for me. I thought to myself, oh, this is what every Christian should say. This is what we all should say. For when we are peacemakers, that's exactly what we're doing. We are doing what we were called and meant to do, exactly where we were meant to do it, and exactly in the way we were meant to do it. That's what it means to be a peacemaker. And that's what we feel when we do it. Contentment. At last I have found my true purpose, and at last I am doing it. You can't get more content than that. Well, in conclusion today, I would share with you one more little story about a young boy in one of my congregations and his father and mother. The mother had gotten sick with cancer. She was in critical condition, and the father was doing all that he could to help her. And this young boy was about 9 years old. He heard his father talking on the phone about how hard it was, the cancer that his wife had. And the little boy heard his father say that, you know, the insurance doesn't pay for everything. There's medicine that she needs that we have to buy that out of our pocket. There are special treatments she needs that we have to buy out of our pocket, and I don't know where I'm going to get all the money. He heard that. The little boy heard his father say that on the phone. And later the father told the story to us. The little boy went to his room and got into his drawer, and at the very bottom of the drawer he had his whole life savings, which he had gathered together from his lemonade stand every summer. He had about $10. So he gathered that up and he took it to his father and he said, "Father, here's all I've got. Let's help Mother." And I thought, when I heard that story, that's what the Father above requires or thinks about us when we decide that we may not have a great amount of love. We may not have a tremendous amount of compassion or a tremendous amount of ability to accept all others unconditionally or a tremendous amount of encouragement. But we have the compassion, the universal acceptance, and the encouragement that we have. And whatever it is we have, we need to go deep down into our drawers and dig it out and give it to the world. Because that's where we'll find how to be a peacemaker. And that's how we'll find the contentment of being a peacemaker. Because just like Jesus said a long time ago, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Amen.